All right, here we go. Another interview with Atlanta journalist George Chidi. Welcome back to VladTV.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. Last time you were here, we made some waves, ruffled some feathers, did some work.
We did, and it's been good. I'm having a great year, but also like being on your show, like opened a bunch of doors. People who were not talking to me as much are talking to me now because they know I have an audience.
Aha. Well, I love it, man. I love to hear stuff like this. Well, let's get into it. And I think the most important thing to talk about right now is an update on the YSL RICO case.
Right. So let's start with the basics. Nobody's getting out of jail anytime soon.
Seems like it.
Nobody's getting out of jail in part because one person in the case hasn't been arrested yet. He's not in jail. And it's the fellow that shot up the bus, like where, the Lil Wayne shooting from, a few years ago. That guy's not in jail right now. And as long as he's out there in the wind, the prosecutor and the judge are going to be concerned about basically a witness being intimidated or threatened. Like there's a credible question. Like there's all sorts of other stuff that's been talked about in the bond hearings about why somebody should or should not get out of jail. But that's the thing that I think is holding it all up. You can't even begin to have a conversation about bail as long as there are threats. Like as long as the prosecutor can stand there and say, like, my witnesses are being threatened. And there have been threats against a potential witness in the case. Somebody who is known to be a YSL gang member. And I say that because he's identified himself as a YSL guy, but not in the indictment. And man, I should have caught on to that. But when I first read the indictment, I should have been going through the indictment and looking at the names there and then looking at who got indicted and seeing who was missing. That said, and I'm not going to say his name because he's in witness protection right now, and but it's not a secret. As long as he's threatened, no judge is going to let anybody out on bond. Like, period. They're in jail until they're either acquitted or convicted.
Okay. So yeah, we had caught, this article about how the DA said the witness is being threatened in the YSL RICO case after some documents ended up leaking online.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing some various YouTube videos and they actually showed who the guy is and so forth. We didn't actually report on it because we felt that we weren't sure that this was a real thing. But essentially, this is a guy that's part of the case. He's one of the guys that's actually being charged, or no?
So he hasn't been charged in this case, but he's facing all kinds of other charges. And I got to tell you, he's an interesting cat. And as it happens, I have all of the paperwork for that here with me. So let's talk about that, because there was a bunch of stuff that didn't come out in that leak because whoever leaked it didn't want the rest of it to come out. First, let's talk a little bit about the leak. So what we saw was this crumpled up piece of paper that looked like part of a court document. And my instinct there is that one of the folks who's involved in the indictment was meeting with their attorney. Like, they couldn't take all the paperwork back with them to their cell, but they snatched a page or two, shoved it down their pants or whatnot, went back and then used a contraband cell phone to photograph it and get it out. But they were strategic about which pages of that document, that 2015 document, that they actually released. They only released the page that showed the guy's name and him supposedly talking to the cops. The rest of the document is an affidavit for a search warrant that was filed almost immediately after Donovan Thomas died. Donovan Thomas, Peanut Thomas, was he was a blood gang member who was involved in the music business, and his murder set off this gang war, which is part of the reason why, like, all the folks in YSL got arrested. And that gang war has been going on since January of 2015. The document, and I'm gonna read a little bit if that's okay, just so that I'm sure that you know where I'm going with this. Somebody in the car, last name is McMullen. Somebody in the car that did the drive-by had a cell phone with them. And the cell phone was pinging the towers between the hit, which was in Castleberry Hill in Atlanta, and the house of the guy that everybody believes is a snitch. Martinez Arnold, Lil Duke, according to this affidavit, like half an hour after the hit, called from jail to that cell phone. Like, Martinez Arnold appears to have known that something was going to go down. He was in jail at the time. He picked up the jail phone and called and had a conversation that was recorded. And I have an Open Records Act request out for that conversation. And when I get it, I'm going to put it on my, like, Atlanta Objective Substack page so everybody can sort of evaluate it on their own. But the way this affidavit describes it, like, it was like a Goodfellas kind of conversation about where you're talking around something without actually saying it directly, like that was going to help.
Well, why was the conversation recorded? Who recorded the conversation?
Jail phone. He called from the jail phones. All the phones are recorded. It wasn't a contraband cell phone. He called from the jail phone. Guys, just hear me. Like, I don't want to give criminal advice, but I'm going to give some criminal advice. Don't talk about crimes on a recorded phone. Like, just bad ganging. And I'm sure I'm making friends when I say that, but come on. So whoever leaked this document, there's all sorts of other stuff in this document that they didn't want the public to know because they didn't want to look like what they look like. But this is all stuff that the police have known since January of 2015. This didn't come out of nowhere. The cops have had, based on that alone, the cops could have been pulling wiretaps on basically everybody this whole time. So if we're talking about an update to the YSL case, one of the things that I've been waiting for is for the defense attorneys to get the full discovery. And for whatever reason, prosecutors have not been giving up all of the information that they actually know and plan to use at trial. I think part of that is because there's one guy in the wind. I think part of that is because they're trying to protect their methods and sources for as long as they possibly can, because I don't think they're actually done investigating. But as soon as that discovery hits, we're going to know exactly whose phones got tapped and for how long. Including the phones in the jail, and that's the thing I'm sort of watching for. The police have known a lot about what people are saying, on contraband cell phones. And my suspicion, and I talked about this last time, is that either the sheriff's department is deliberately leaking contraband cell phones into the jail so that they can listen to them, or they have something like a Stingray, which is a device that you use as a packet sniffer. Basically, it sits in between a cell phone and the cell phone tower and monitors all the traffic. And that they are simply monitoring every phone call that goes in and out. and not just every phone call, but if it's a packet sniffer, they're looking at every packet of data, which is to say text messages, Instagram messages, all of it. And they can do that without a warrant for somebody who is in jail using a contraband cell phone.
Wow. Okay.
Sorry, that's a lot.
Well, Donovan Thomas, aka Peanut, was the guy who got murdered, who set off a lot of these, terrible events later on. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but last time we talked about the whole situation, wasn't the police trying to infer that Peanut was cooperating?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people hit me, like I think from Peanut's, friends and family who were really upset over these allegations and everything else like that. And I don't want to paint him in a negative light, his memory in a negative light if that's actually not true. So are they sure that he was actually cooperating, or is this just a bad rumor?
Nothing more about that has come out in court. I don't think we're going to see anything about that until the trial. What I'm looking at is what was in the indictment. And the fact that, like, in the indictment, they specifically noted a call or a communication that Young Thug had with senior ranking members, leaders of the Sex Money Murder gang, where they discussed having to kill people. And then Young Thug, a couple of days later, and only a few weeks after Donovan Thomas's death, in that context, doing a video where he says that people who talk in court need to be fucking killed. That's the quote. That's where I'm getting that from. And I think it is a reasonable inference. It doesn't mean that that's what happened. But that is very clearly what the prosecution is trying to telegraph. Now, maybe they're going to pull back from that because maybe there was no federal prosecution that actually emerged from testimony, or maybe that's still something that they're looking at. I don't know. But why is it in the indictment? If that's not something that they care about in this case, why put that particular piece of information in the indictment?
Okay. And is there a chance of, because right now this is a state RICO case in Georgia. Is there a chance this can get escalated into a federal RICO case?
There's always a chance. And I think in particular, because of the switch, ATF wants all of these automatic firearms off the street. And we have started to run into them in ways that we did not before. And when I say we, I mean at Metro Atlanta. There was another case of the guys who were knocking over celebrity houses in North Fulton, where when they went to arrest them, there's another guy with a switch. A switch is a max 10-year, but it's probably the least I've heard somebody getting jail time is 3 years. If for whatever reason, this local prosecution blows up, and there are a dozen ways that could happen. There's prosecutorial misconduct. There's a witness issue. I don't know. If the state case goes away, I could see the ATF stepping in because of the switch. But there are a bunch of other reasons they might want to as well.
Okay. And we talk about the switch. Since our last interview, Young Thug, Yak Gotti, and I guess 3 other people are now officially charged with possession of a machine gun.
Right. And that's a formality. We knew that charge was going to happen. There was no news there. As soon as the police announced that they had found this thing, that charge was going to happen. But it adds an additional complicating factor to everything. If you're in possession of one, you're guilty unless you've got a federal license to possess a machine gun. The only question is whether or not they could prove possession in Young Thug's house. I don't see how he gets out of that.
Right. And I actually looked up an article about that. And, Yak Gotti's attorney denied any guilt associated with that switch in Young Thug's house. And Martinez Arnold, and you're saying that that's Lil Duke?
Yeah.
Okay. His lawyer also denied that Lil Duke was in possession of this, and even said that Lil Duke doesn't live with Young Thug.
Right.
So essentially, Young Thug is going to have to either, eat that case, or someone else is going to have to step up and say, that was actually my gun.
Right. And given everything that's going on, I just don't see that happening. It's possible, but I don't, we'll have to watch. That's one of the things that we're watching right now is, all of this stuff about this potential snitch and all the rest of that is just everybody watching to see who's going to flip. You have 20-odd defendants, many of whom are indigent, they're relying on a public defender in order to get out of all of this, including Christian Eppinger, although there's no getting out of this for him. Christian Eppinger is the fellow who shot a cop 6 times and kind of set off the clock for all of the arrests that happened about 3 months later. He's got a public defender, but he's got a public defender because he's been sentenced to jail basically for the rest of his life, and there's no getting out of any of this for him. We're watching to see who's going to flip.
Well, Young Thug got denied bond for the 3rd time. Yeah. Which means that he has to stay in jail until his actual trial, which is, I guess, is January 3rd?
9th, actually.
9th. Okay, January
although
9th.
I'm going to tell you, because of all the discovery problems that are happening right now, I would find it highly surprising if they actually begin the trial in early January. I'm betting it gets pushed into the middle of the year.
Wow. So you think that all these guys are going to stay in jail until June?
Maybe. The discovery, the lawyers for the defense are entitled to know what the cops are gonna do to them in court. That's the law, it's the Constitution, and they don't have all the discovery in hand. And you can't just dump it on them with a week to go before the trial. There's a problem that is not being well explained from the district attorney's office in terms of telling the defense everything it knows.
Uh-huh. Okay. Well, Gunna also had his bond denied. He's also going to stay in jail until the actual trial date, whether that's January or later on. And based on our conversation, as well as other conversations, interviews I had with, lawyers like Mo Gangat, who went through the case and everything else like that.
Yep.
It is essentially established that Gunna has done very little in terms of this overall case.
He got arrested. He was put through the system.
Uh-huh.
You know what his charge was at the end of the day for that incident?
What's that?
I think it's an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. He paid a fine for a window tint, and they sent him on his way.
Right.
They didn't have anything on him on that incident, yet currently that incident and very little else is being used to charge him with 5 to 20 held without bail.
But he's being labeled as a gang leader by the prosecution?
Yeah, and for something that I can't track down. Don't get me wrong, I'm a schlub. Maybe I'm missing it. I don't know. But in court, the district attorney's office argued that Gunna was somehow involved, and they were deliberately vague, involved in 2 murders related to a Crips gang in South Fulton called the Shady Park Crips. Now, the Shady Park Crips are real. They are involved in violence, but I can't figure out which murders they're talking about or how Gunna might be involved. I can't find the agency that's investigating that because it's not the South Fulton police. They have categorically denied knowing anything about a connection between Gunna and their neighborhood Crip crew. They don't, it blindsided them as well. The Shady Park Crips predate the existence of a South Fulton municipality. They became a city a few years ago. But I checked with like the Fulton County Police, and they don't know what's going on either. I don't know what that is. And because we don't have the discovery, neither does Gunna's crew, frankly. I look at that like I'm wondering at what point the prosecution is just trying to make an argument because they're making an argument. I don't know what that is. I have asked, and they have not explained it to me.
Yeah, because I guess the prosecutors claim that Young Thug and Gunna were, quote unquote, followed by snipers when they got arrested a while back.
Yeah. There was a second car behind them that had people who had guns. Calling it snipers is kind of a... So prosecutors talk like in one way and defense attorneys talk in another way. And somebody in the middle needs to listen to this and go, okay, you're full of crap.
Right. Okay, so since our last interview, there was a nurse who got caught for allegedly trying to smuggle drugs into the jail for Gunna. Allegedly.
Right. Allegedly.
She got arrested. There's a mugshot of her. It's a mess.
It's a mess. It's a mess. It's a mess on a mess because there's a lot going on there. And I'm probably going to have to come back here in a couple of months once I've really started to pull all the data. I have a bunch of Open Records Act requests out to the sheriff's office because the sheriff's office through all of this has kind of been falling apart. Why the heck did she think she could do that? Was this the first time? Probably not. Like, the prosecution says she was bringing stuff in for Gunna. The problem is that there are a bunch of other complaints, and not related to her, but for other folks, of drugs getting into the jail, of contraband cell phones getting into the jail, of misconduct by sheriff's deputies that has started to accelerate in ways that are deeply disturbing. Basically, you've got a bunch of millionaires in jail being tended by a bunch of sheriff's deputies who are making on the order of $50,000 a year. You can see where something might break. Being a sheriff's deputy, being a jailer it's not a fun job. It's not a happy job most of the time. It's like the prison system all over Georgia has been falling apart, and there's no reason to believe that the Fulton County Jail is any better. It's part of the reason why the city government did a U-turn on putting people in that jail into the city's jail. There's been a big, broad movement to close the city jail for years. That movement has sort of stopped because they need to get people out of the county jail, because the county jail is that screwed up right now. Now, we can talk about blame. There's a new sheriff. I like the new sheriff. Like, this might just be conditions that are beyond his immediate ability to fix. There's a lot going on there. And for all of the criminality that we're looking at around YSL, there's a bunch of crime that's being committed by the deputies themselves. And I'm going to pull reports that are looking at internal discipline and write about that at length. That nurse, I think, is just the tip of the iceberg. And I don't know what to do. As a journalist, the hard part here is that I'm trying to investigate a law enforcement agency. And that's never fun. And it can be relationship breaking, but it's necessary right now. Because if somebody gets hurt in jail, we're going to want to know why it happened and how.
Okay, well, at one point, Young Thug's lawyer filed a petition to the jail and said that Young Thug was being held in inhumane conditions. And the jail center actually responded and said, this is a jail. It is a detention center. It's not the Ritz-Carlton.
Right. So it's all fun and games until somebody gets shanked. The jail conditions are such because of overcrowding and because of misconduct by the sheriff's deputies. And the sheriff's going to be pissed at me when he hears me say that, and I don't care. There's a problem right now. Between those things, prisoner safety is not guaranteed today. Like there's a problem. And it started, like, we can look at like the YFN Lucci attempted stabbing from earlier this year
Right.
as a starting point for that. Or the fact that other prisoners are being they're being searched and they're finding weapons on them right now. The jails, I mean, and it's a difficult problem because you've got like around couple of dozen YFN guys over here and a couple of dozen YSL guys over there. And who knows how many other gang members who are affiliated one way or another, or sort of have a relationship to one set or another, who are looking for a way to get stabby. I think Thug's lawyer had a point. It doesn't necessarily mean that Thug should be released, like, because there's all of this other stuff going on. But if there's an actual incident of violence in the jail that could be directly attributed to this gang war, I think that will be a moment where this conversation needs to be revisited.
Well, yeah. I mean, you talk about how YFN Lucci got stabbed. And since last time, I guess they talked about how Lucci wasn't actually given a plea deal and they're essentially preparing for trial in that particular case.
Yes. I mean, he looks like the big dog. And it's the same thing with Young Thug, by the way. Like, he looks like the big guy and they want to take the big guys down. And I think they're willing to spend the little guys in order to get the big guy, which is why plea deals are going to happen for other folks, but not him, not Lucci, and, probably not the other, like the top 2 or 3 other guys. They're probably done too.
Right, because Walter Murphy, who is the alleged YSL co-founder, he's also locked up and he's been denied bond.
Yeah. No, they're not. Like, again, as long as they got somebody in the wind right now, they're not going to let anybody out. They're not even going to start listening to the other arguments, as long as they think that there's a credible threat to a witness. And there are witnesses, and they are talking. The funny thing is, I think part of the reason that this investigation ultimately ended up in the indictments, the way it happened, the timing it happened, is because there's no one witness that you can take out and make it all go away. I think there are enough people talking where they could tell each witness, like, they'd have to kill 10 of you. They're not going to do that. And as long as they know that they can't get you all, they're not going to try to get any of you because the risk is too high.
Well, yeah. I mean, the Fulton County DA is talking about how she's receiving threats over the YSL RICO case. And wasn't there was a young guy that was arrested for like threatening
that fella's got some psych issues. And honestly, I don't want to. He was a cousin of one of the defendants. And he was on Instagram. And he Instagrammed like the chief of the police department for the Atlanta school system, along with the sheriff and the sheriff's wife and Fonnie Willis, saying, "I'm going to kill you." And he's a teenager and he's kind of screwed up, and I'm going to set that one aside. I mean, charge him, but he needs therapy.
Yeah.
But he's not the one to worry about. There are other folks who are perfectly willing to kill someone. And we just don't know if they've caught them all, frankly. It's a complicated case, and it's complicated in part because the politics around all of this are complicated. People are asking, is Fonnie Willis doing this because she wants to get reelected? And the answer is yes. Of course she's doing this because she wants to get reelected. This is how she thinks she's going to get reelected, by reducing the number of people who are murderers, allegedly, on the street. And, there's a lot. She's high profile on purpose. She is in her first term in office, and she needs to prove to an otherwise skeptical public that she knows how to do her job and that she could do it differently than the person who preceded her. And so she's being super visible. It's not an accident that when there's a big gang case, she gets in front of the cameras. I don't fault her for it. I would expect anyone who is seeking elected office to do exactly the same thing.
Well, we interviewed Mo Gangat, a lawyer who comes in and weighs in on various legal cases that are happening right now. And according to him, he thinks that if this case was in New York, it would be dismissed.
If they were up here in New York in federal court, they would move in and move to dismiss and say, Judge, read this indictment. Tell me what this guy did that has him facing 5 to 20 with no bond.
Might be. Especially since there's New York juries are very, very different from Atlanta juries. The case law is different and the rules of evidence are different. And a lot of the things that the prosecution is putting into this case around rap lyrics and Instagram posts and people with pictures throwing up gang signs would not be admissible in a New York court. I think he's probably on point there. I'm not a lawyer, so bear with me. I'm just a guy who's been writing about, politics and crime for a long time. But there's Georgia's gang law is unique. Georgia's gang law is fundamentally different than gang law and RICO law in other states because of what it lets you introduce into evidence. And so you get lyrics and you get Instagram posts. And there are other states where you could do that, but not really the way you could do it here in Georgia. Fonnie Willis is trying to validate the law here in some ways. Like she's deliberately putting this stuff in there, like knowing it's going to be tested and challenged. And maybe it gets thrown out. I don't know. But she's pushing it to see what's going to happen.
Well, yeah, there was these rumors that was floating around, and I don't know whether they're real rumors or fake rumors. They sounded somewhat fake, but there was this fake, real or unreal rumor that Lil Baby's, crew, 4PF, 4 Pockets Full,
yeah,
were possibly facing RICO indictments, and people were tweeting this to Lil Baby, and he responded, "Only God could judge me."
Right. Or 12 jurors. But where do I put this? Because everybody's talking about who's going to be the next RICO. We just saw the next RICO that just came out, and that was
and I want to get into that because the Atlanta DA announced there's going to be more high-profile RICO cases coming in the next 60 days.
Yeah,
and the first one to actually be announced was Atlanta's drug rich gang.
Right, and they rap. Some of them rap, like the high profile one is drug rich Hecht, who ironically lives less than a mile from me. I live in DeKalb County. This is a DeKalb County gang that got busted by the Fulton County District Attorney, in part because the gang was allegedly knocking off houses of very rich people in North Fulton. There was a football player, there was a soccer player, there was a reality television star, there was an Instagram influencer, and in one case there was a home invasion where they held people kidnapped basically for a while they were ransacking the house. And I get why they would do that there because you go where the money is. My neighborhood, not a lot of money. But they're also facing indictments in DeKalb County and Gwinnett County and probably someplace else as well. They're also rappers. There are a couple of rappers in there. There's Drug Rich, I think Bino, Drug Rich Hecht. There's a Miko Worldwide YouTube video that showed this gang at a convenience store up the street from where I live. And it's funny because that video came out 3 weeks later, there's a massive indictment and a bunch of them are in jail. So that's one. But that's nobody who's rapping in that group is breaking the top 40, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
People are looking at Lil Baby and and 4PF because they're high profile. It's just like, who do I know? I know this one. So surely this is the one that's going to be next. And that's not how this works. The Fulton County District Attorney is looking to reduce violence. Like, she has said that directly to me and said that in public. The purpose behind all of this is to lower Atlanta's sky-high, murder rate. The murder rate today is something like 80% higher than it was in 2019. And it's part of the reason her predecessor got thrown out. A lot of those murders, and she will say a number that is exaggerated, but a lot of those murders are gang-related. And so that looks like the easiest way to directly hit the murder rate is to go and round up gangsters who are killing people. And that's the important part. Like, she's not just, oh, well, you're dealing drugs. I don't care. Like, is your gang involved with people who are killing people? And there are a couple of gangs that I have my eyes on where I think that fits the bill and where I think people should worry, like if you happen to be members of this gang. The Play for Keeps, PFK. This is a street gang in Atlanta. There are rappers who are tangentially sort of connected to them. There was a killing about 3 months ago of a kid. It's a 14, 15-year-old Nigerian-American kid, Joshua Adetunji. His mother has left the country since. These were kids killing other kids. These were teenagers shooting at each other at the Atlanta fairgrounds. Like one kid is walking through and he's got a gun and he's saying, I'm going to shoot people. And another kid who is a member of a crew called the Play for Keeps Killers gets into a gunfight with them, and Adetunji gets killed in the gunfight. I don't think Adetunji was a gang member. He could have been, but I don't think so. Like, by all descriptions, he was just caught in the crossfire. That sort of thing, if you're the district attorney, you go, I got to shut that down. Because when one person gets killed, it creates this whole wave of anger and resentment and desire for revenge, and then they start shooting up someone else, and then they get pissed off, and suddenly it's a war, and she wants to stop the wars. Like this whole thing with YSL and YFN, there were 40 drive-bys that emerged in the 3 months after Donovan Thomas was killed, and other people were killed in those drive-bys. Willis is like deliberately looking for situations like that she can stop before they start.
Well, you talked about the drug rich gang arrests. So I actually looked into this. 26 members, alleged members, were actually arrested. There's a 220 count indictment.
Yes, there is.
Police feel that they're able to link the drug rich gang to at least 13 violent home invasions, including where one man got shot during the incident. And you mentioned some of this already, but I want to basically be specific in terms of what they're being charged for. The most high profile house burglary was Mariah Carey's $5 million mansion in Atlanta.
$5 million mansion.
There's also Marlo Hampton, who's on The Real Housewives of Atlanta, Calvin Ridley, who plays for the Atlanta Falcons, Brad Guzan, who plays for Atlanta United Soccer. And they're also saying that Gunna, his house was targeted.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, why not? Like, if there's money, like that's all this was about. Like, so the neighborhood that Drug Rich operates out of, like their neighborhood is sort of the North Hairston Memorial Drive corridor, just west of Stone Mountain and north of Stone Mountain. And it is some of the most shocking poverty you're going to find in Metro Atlanta. The schools have a 55% turnover rate because people have to pull their kids out because they've run out of their 3 months of free rent at the apartment complex because of the move-in special, and they've got to go somewhere else. And there's a particular corner of North Hairston and Central Drive, which is from time to time an open air drug gallery. And I've taken up with the police department in DeKalb County to better understand what they're trying to do to deal with this, but it's actually not a policing problem. This gang emerged because of the poverty there and because a gangster disciple set was arrested in another gigantic RICO case in 2016, one where there was a DeKalb County police officer was one of the people who was charged. The gangster disciples all go away, and suddenly there's a vacuum. The murder rate increased in this area for years. And then Drug Rich sort of emerged as the dominant force, and it's a hybrid gang. There are some gangster disciples guys who sort of didn't get arrested the first time, and they're in Drug Rich. There are some Crips in there. There are some Bloods in there. Like, it's weird. It's just, we're who's left, and what can we do? Let's get some money. Like, well, where's the money? Well, let's hit Marlo Hampton's house. Like, that's all that's all the thinking that's going into that. And in the meanwhile, they've put up music on YouTube, rap with guys, face masks and guns and whatever. Like, for me as a journalist right now, I've got a fundamental burning question, and it is how much of what we're seeing in rap is real and how much of it needs to be real. Because all these guys are angling for contracts. Like, they want to get signed. Like, that's their ticket out. Can I get signed so that I don't have to live in this crappy trap house on North Hairston and hit licks in order to pay the rent? Like, can I get signed? And every signal that the music industry is giving is, well, you got to be real. Like, you have to be authentic. You have to be street. You have to be real. And show me that you're real. Like, and so they're doing crimes so that they can build a rep, so that they can tell people that they're rapping about the real stuff so that they end up on, Warner's label. Like, I really think this needs to stop. Something needs to happen there.
Well, yeah. I mean, also with this Drug Rich indictment, they're accused of kidnapping a teenager and her mother in a home invasion in October. One of them was caught with a switch.
Yep.
And there's music videos, like you said, that are essentially being tied into, the lyrics are being tied into the actual crimes. And, the Fulton DA, Fani Willis, actually made a statement about this. She said, I think if you decide to admit your crimes over a beat, I'm going to use it. You do not get to commit crimes in my county and then decide to brag on it, which you do that for a form of intimidation and to further the gang and not be held responsible. She went on. She said, just one of the lyrics used in this indictment is, me and my crew striking in all black, send me the drop, we'll kick in the house. If we steal a car, we're going to take off the tags. Well, she proceeded, well, they're kicking in doors, committing home invasions, and now I'm using those lyrics that they're admitting to doing that. I'm going to continue to do that. People can continue to be angry about it. I have some legal advice. Don't confess to crimes on rap lyrics if you don't want them to be used, or at least get out of my county.
Right. There is a political split right now about the lyrics thing. That's interesting to me, and I think should be interesting to your listeners. I interviewed Hank Johnson, who's a congressman in East Atlanta, DeKalb County, where Drug Rich operates. And he's introduced something called the RAP Act. And it would be legislation that bars the use of lyrics, but also any other artistic expression as evidence in a criminal trial unless there was an additional finding of fact that it was related to the crime. It wouldn't affect Fani Willis because Fani Willis these are state prosecutions. It would only affect federal prosecutions. But Hank Johnson and I talked, 2 days ago, and what he was saying is that there's, that artistic expression should be protected. That if we want to have creativity, people need to be able to make stuff up. And that rappers deliberately lie, for lack of a better word. They insert themselves into a narrative about what's going on the street in order to sell records and sustain their art. I'm not sure I'm 100% with Hank Johnson here, but I'm also not 100% with Fonnie Willis either. And right now there's a big argument taking place at the political level about how do you use lyrics? When do you use lyrics? What kind of lyrics? And who are you really using them against? California just passed a law.
Right.
And the important thing here for me is that it passed unanimously, which is to say that 25% of Republicans also voted for this thing in their legislature that subjects the use of rap lyrics to an additional layer of scrutiny. It doesn't bar them entirely. It just says you need to review that for racial bias before you're going to use it. I actually think that's a fairly reasonable position to take.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting how it's focusing on rap lyrics as opposed to just lyrics. So this doesn't include like R&B lyrics, rock lyrics, country music lyrics. You know, country music is pretty violent sometimes.
Funny you say that. Like Hank Johnson actually name-checked Johnny Cash and said nobody was going to arrest Johnny Cash because he said, I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die.
Right.
I think the difference here, though, is that there was no other evidence that Johnny Cash went to Reno and shot a man in order to watch him die. There needs to be a clear connection between the lyrics and an event. But if there is a clear connection, I think this should be fair game. It's just a question of when do you determine when that clear connection exists? Because if you're doing it in front of a jury, it's too late. The jury is going to, whatever prejudices the jury has about rap music are going to be, it's a shot of adrenaline to actually see the lyric and hear it. I think I think this question of bias is reasonable. I think we should be looking at the bias here.
Well, another case that's happening in Atlanta right now is a rapper named Baby Drill.
Yeah.
AKA, real name Del
Caristo Wilson.
Del Caristo Wilson. Right.
Man, that's weird. That whole case is strange. Before we get into that, I just want to say that I have been unable to get all the documents I want on this case because the Fulton County court system has a website that is screwed up and has been for years. And the only way to get stuff is to physically show up and stand in a tiny little room in the back of the courthouse pulling documents. Amazingly frustrating. And it's frustrated me with this case, which is why people don't fully understand what's going on with Baby Drill.
Well, according to reports, 2 people were killed on April 8th, Quantavious Harris and Grady Scott. Baby Drill is accused of killing Grady Scott.
Correct.
And he was denied bond in this particular case. Since then, there was an unreleased music video that was posted on YouTube 10 weeks after the Harris murder, which basically there's a whole lot of stuff in there that doesn't make Baby Drill look all that good.
Right.
Some of the lyrics are N-words thought this shit was sweet, shot his ass, asked Daffy.
Right. So it's crazy. So there's another rapper, small time rapper, Hardbody Daffy, who was murdered. And I believe he was the other person who was he's not Scott, he's the other guy. Baby Drill is not accused of killing Hardbody Daffy. But it's interesting that there appears to be a connection in the case that I was not immediately aware of because I couldn't get at the documents until yesterday. There is a stay away order in his incarceration documents that requires him to be separated from 2 other people who are accused of murder and gang charges. And I believe one of them is accused of murdering Hardbody Daffy. There's a bunch of stuff that's mixed up here. He's not accused of killing Hardbody Daffy, but I think there may actually be a connection there. And I'll know more once I get the full case file after I sue someone at this point.
Well, yeah. I mean, in Baby Drill's music, he said, "Caught my first body when I was 18." On
Yeah.
the song called "Dunt Sane."
Right.
Um,
That was with Young Duty, I believe. And Young Nudie had a different line where he was saying, "Almost caught my first body when I was 17," or something like that. The people wanted to link Baby Drill to a different murder, and that's the Lil Marlo murder.
right. And Lil Marlo was a very close friend of Lil Baby.
Yeah. And I don't actually think that any of this has anything to do with that. Like, if it does, I'd be surprised. It would be a hell of a coincidence, if nothing else. There was a lot going on with the Lil Marlo thing. Lil Marlo's brother was accused of a murder in Brookhaven. And that murder case went bad. And by went bad, I mean prosecutors had to drop the case mid-trial, which never, ever happens. Like, the judge said, "You're done. Case dismissed. You're free to go." To two guys that they believed they had enough evidence to convict. The problem is, their two witnesses disappeared on them. And, they're gone. And I think, the prosecutors believe they went off to California. They didn't want anything to do with this. So Marlo's brother gets off scot-free of a murder that was gang-related. And it makes you start to ask whether or not Marlo's murder was retaliation for this other guy not going to jail or being punished for a murder. And this is what I'm talking about when I say that the district attorneys of Metro Atlanta, they see all of this stuff and they can kind of connect the dots. The prosecutors talk to them. Their interest is in stopping a chain of retaliations from expanding. Because every death, and I've said this before, I said this last time, every death creates a hole in a community that doesn't get filled. There's no coming back from it, and there's no redemption arc for whoever gets killed, no matter how terrible a person you think they are. You can't tell me in 2 or 5 or 10 years they're not leading relief missions in Central Africa or quashing other gang beef or otherwise doing great and good things. Everybody deserves justice. Everybody deserves justice. The people who you're trying to keep from being killed deserve justice. The people who are in your jails deserve justice. And I think that's the thing that we should be screaming for at this. Not free my guy. I hate it when I see that. I know how common it is. I know everybody says, "Free my, Fred Rollo," for example. I just want justice. If justice means that person should be free, that person should be free. If justice means that person should be in jail, that person should be in jail. But that's the thing. Look for justice.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about Lil Marlo. Lil Baby had a documentary that aired on Amazon recently.
Yeah.
And he talked about that whole situation. Him and Marlo were really close, and they kind of, joined Quality Control right around the same time and started rapping right around the same time. Lil Baby took off, but Marlo, his career never really took off. And, they talked about it. I think P from Quality Control was saying how, since Marlo's career wasn't taking off, he was still in the streets. He was still doing street shit, and he got killed. I did an interview with this artist named Bankroll Freddie, and he talked about how he was in the studio with Lil Baby when they found out that Lil Marlo got killed. And it was just kind of a tragic kind of thing where, these guys are seeing their peers blow up in the music industry, start making millions of dollars, hit songs and so forth, and they're not getting that type of traction in their music, but they're trying to keep up with their friends who are making millions of dollars in legal money. So they sometimes start to do illegal stuff to get the jewelry and get the cars and get the clothes, and which ultimately leads to either death or prison.
I wish I knew how to nip that in the bud. just look back at the industry. Like when I see this stuff, the industry could do something to get in between all of this. Like they could stop signing folks who are begging. You know, if the industry had a social conscience, it would start looking at these problems in the same ways that you and I are. But who is to say what Marlo would have been today?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, people don't always hit on the first or second try. Sometimes you get it. Like you learn and you grow and you hear things, and maybe he would have made some shift. And you and I could only speculate. And he'd be little baby right now. Like, this is the price of murder.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to be starting a podcast at some point in the next 6 months. And it's basically looking at this connection between street crime and the music industry. It's YSL, but it's more than that. I really want to ask this big question about how much of this is real and how much of it has to be real.
Well, this is something that I actually talked about after our interview a couple of times. And when you look at, for example, this YSL case, right? And take a step back and look at what's happening in the legal system. You have situations like there was a guy who worked for Comcast who ends up killing a woman at a house that he was installing cable in. The family sued Comcast and proved that Comcast didn't do background checks on this guy, and the judge awarded the family $1 billion for the murder of this woman.
Yeah.
Geico had to cough up like $3 million because a woman got an STD from having sex in a car with a guy who was insured by Geico. Ridiculous situations, but I'm putting this out there to say this. You have Young Thug right now who's facing a lot of serious charges. And one of the things that the DA is trying to use in this case is how YFN Lucci's mother got shot.
Yeah.
And there's a lyric that came out from Young Thug later on that said, I shot at his mother, now he don't mention me.
Yeah.
Right? And they're trying to connect this lyric to YFN Lucci's mother getting shot.
Right.
As well as Young Thug putting up Instagram posts saying, oh, I would have, YFN Lucci, I would have been killed you if I didn't like the way you treated your mother or something like that, right? So let's just say, for argument's sake, that before Young Thug goes to trial, he accepts a plea deal of some sort, right? They give him, let's say, 10 years. His lawyer's saying, look, you're facing 40, take this 10. This is the best deal you're ever going to get. Now, in a plea deal, you have to admit to your crimes in the plea deal.
Yes,
right?
correct.
So let's just say in this plea deal, one of the things that he admits to is, yes, this lyric that I said about YFN Lucci's mother getting shot, that was because I was involved in the shooting of YFN Lucci's mom.
I see where you're going.
So then, once this is established in court and there's legal documents proving this, Lucci's mom goes, I'm going to sue 300 Entertainment.
Bingo.
And who owns 300 Entertainment? Warner Music Group. In fact, 300 sold their company to Warner Music Group, I think a month or two before all of this.
And I've got to wonder whether or not their due diligence, sort of disclosed this risk in that deal, because then there'll be a different lawsuit. But yeah.
Right. So based on what I'm seeing in the legal environment of America, it seems pretty clear that YFN Lucci's mom could potentially get hundreds of millions of dollars from Warner Music Group saying, look, you guys did not do your due diligence with this artist who you're promoting and profiting off of, who in fact is writing lyrics that have been proven in court, is talking about shooting women and mothers and violence and so forth. You guys are now liable for this. They cough up hundreds of millions of dollars and creates a chain reaction throughout the whole music industry where suddenly no label wants to, sign a quote unquote street artist anymore.
Entirely possible. What I think is all right, so I don't know if they'll stop signing street artists, but what I think they'll do is they'll end up with somebody who's vetting lyrics for legal sort of questions. Like, is this real? No, really, is this real? Like, can you plausibly argue that this is not real? Like, but I think it'll change. I think it will change music. I think something like that would change music. And honestly, I think something like that should change music. I don't like the idea of some guy who's got 2 nickels to rub together, who's knocking off a store or something like that in order to get studio time, ultimately being the person on the hook. Like, you've got to look at the top, the real top. Like, the real top are the guys at the Universal Musics and the Warners and all the rest of the big name, like, multinational recording companies. Like, liability for this ultimately needs to go as high as it can. Because I'm not interested in writing stories where, like, at the end of the day, poor people get poorer and end up in jail. That's not what I'm doing this for. Like, I'm trying to find a way to create systemic change that helps the people who don't have anything. Like, those are not the people, like the Len Blavatniks of the world. The guy who owns Warner, like, is not a guy who owns nothing. Like, and if he is making money from music that, like, can ultimately be found to be responsible for promoting violent street gangs, I think he should be on the hook. But that's a lot of dots to connect. What I will say is, I have had this conversation with the district attorney's office. Like, they are aware of that strategy. Now, whether or not they're employing it is something else, but, like, if they don't, it's a choice. They didn't just overlook it.
Well, you did an article on Rolling Stone recently.
Yep, came out my first Rolling Stone story yesterday.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Congrats. And it's titled Killer Mike and 2 Chainz Tell Politicians Stop Fucking with Atlanta Clubs.
Yeah. And I think they've got a point. Like, although there's nuances that didn't make that story. So Killer Mike is a big name political person, actually, in Atlanta these days. He's a civic-minded business owner, and he's got his fingers in a lot of pies. He's trying to start a bank, and I really want that bank to get off the ground. But he's also been trying to do some other things. And 2 Chainz owns 3 or 4 restaurants around Atlanta. Like, the ones that everybody knows about are Esco Seafood and Escobar in Castleberry Hill. The city's been trying to shut down a bunch of places that are, like, attract violence. In part because all of these murders, this crazy murder problem that emerged during the pandemic, like, a disproportionate amount of it was coming out of a handful of nightclubs and late night restaurants, some of whom were operating without permits. But it was taking forever to shut them down. So the city wants to do an ordinance to make it easy for, like, the cops to just go, no, you're done. Like, put tape on the door and you're done. I'm exaggerating a little there. Like, there would be a court hearing, but still. The problem is, if the cost of creating security in Atlanta becomes too burdensome, then small business owners, and when I say small business owners in Atlanta, in the music industry and the club scene, I'm talking about Black people. When Black people can't afford to pull the security they need to, they're going to sell out to companies like Hilton, or the guys who run the Hard Rock, or Jimmy Buffett, who bloody well built a Jimmy Buffett Margaritaville, like, next to CNN Center. And that thing is horrifying. And if you have any love for this city, you will stay away from it. It is not of Atlanta. Like, don't go there. Now I'm going to get the parrot heads on my ass, but fuck it. They're worried that small business owners, like themselves, aren't going to be able to function. And with all of this convention traffic that's going to be coming, because the city wants to get the Democratic National Convention in 2024. And there's all like, they're going to have a piece of the World Cup in 2026. And they're looking for all this other stuff. Like, they're worried that black people are going to get pushed out of the black Mecca as business owners. Like, I think they've got a point. 2 Chainz is a bit of a hypocrite here, but I think they've got a point. Because 2 Chainz places keep getting shot up. Like, 2 Chainz had one of his employees was killed in a shooting like last year. There was another shooting. I think there were a couple of people got hurt. Like, he started this members only lounge downtown. That got shot up about 6 months later. He closed it in January and hasn't reopened it. Like, he's got a security issue going on at his stuff. And so when he's saying, no, we shouldn't do this nuisance thing because, like, it's going to be a burden. Like, yeah, well, your stuff's getting shot up. What are you going to do about it? Like, I mean, it's a reasonable question for me to ask. Like, I could see both sides to this argument.
Well, George Chidi, appreciate you coming back for the second time. I think you really illuminate a lot of these rumors and innuendos and so forth that's floating around with the actual facts and the actual paperwork and so forth. Definitely, I learn a lot from having these types of conversations. So I'm assuming that our audience learns a lot as well. So appreciate you coming back in. Congratulations on the Rolling Stone gig. Congratulations on any opportunities that have come from these interviews. We're going to keep doing them and possibly even expand our business relationship and even do more stuff in the future.
I'm at your disposal.
That's what it is. Peace.
Peace.